Before continuing with his attack on Exhibit D, Webb released a 5-part video response to my Australia and the Conspirators. The 5-part series has to be by far the weakest pro-NASA video since Astro Brand 2's video on reflected light. There are actually only 2 points that warrant my attention. Firstly, Webb continuously alleges that I never mention that the Tidbinbilla Communications Complex in Canberra is NASA's facility in Australia.
Although Jarrah acknowledges NASA's tracking stations at Goldstone and Madrid, he avoids mention of Canberra in his Exhibit D series.
This is an outright lie by Webb, because I did mention this. In both Exhibit D and my Australia and the Conspirators, I prominently showed a clip from the ABC series Catalyst in which the Tidbinbilla complex is visited and clearly stated as being part of NASA's deep space network.
Rather than argue substance, Jarrah wants to argue semantics. Okay, so playing an excerpt from a video where the narrator says the word Tidbinbilla is the same as saying the word Tidbinbilla yourself. Actually, Canberra is the word you just heard me accuse Jarrah of avoiding. Nevertheless, it's the same as adding a quote to a research paper. A quote that you agree with and wholeheartedly endorse. Right?
I'm at the Deep Space Complex at Tidbinbilla, just outside of Canberra, and here's where they track all the spacecraft in the solar system.
Essentially, Jarrah's letting his source speak for him. Alright, that means that Jarrah must agree with this source and accepts what it says as fact, right?
This facility is one of 3 in the world that make up NASA's Deep Space Network. This facility is one of 3 in the world that make up NASA's Deep Space Network. That make up NASA's Deep Space Network. That make up NASA's Deep Space Network. NASA's Deep Space Network. NASA's Deep Space Network. NASA's Deep Space Network.
So we should assume then, using Jarrah logic, that he is still in agreement with another statement made later in that very same excerpt from that very same episode of Catalyst.
Now this dish is probably the most famous here, is it?
Yeah, this is the dish originally from Honeysuckle Creek that actually returned the very first images of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walking on the surface of the moon way back in July 1969.
Since Jarrah repeats the statement, as well as the line about Tidbinbilla, in both his Exhibit D and Australia and the Conspirators videos, then he must also agree that Honeysuckle Creek received the first images of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walking on the surface of the moon. Hence, Jarrah must agree that man walked on the moon. That is the only Jarrah-logical conclusion that's possible. And if that's the case, then we're done here, right?
This facility is one of 3 in the world that make up NASA's Deep Space Network.
To have a network that can provide communication to all the spacecraft anywhere in the solar system, you need them separated by about 1/3 of the world each. So a good 120 degrees line either side runs nicely through Australia. Ended up being the best spot.
Now this dish is probably the most famous here, is it?
Yeah, this is the dish originally from Honeysuckle Creek that actually returned the very first images of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walking on the surface of the moon way back in July 1969.
If not, then what part of this excerpt from Catalyst should we believe that Jarrah believes? To figure that out, you have to wait for Jarrah to paraphrase what was said and glean his interpretation from that. When I said that Jarrah doesn't mention the word Canberra, I simply meant that he doesn't say the word himself in his Exhibit D series.
The Australian radio telescopes, such as Parkes and Honeysuckle Creek, are often presented as the ultimate independent verification for the Apollo missions. But they are not independent observatories. All the Australian tracking stations are part of NASA's Deep Space Network.
Now, Australia has a fine tradition of keeping the lines of communication with space open. So I caught up with NASA's man down under, Glenn Nagle, to find out about some of our great achievements, which include everything from Neil Armstrong's first steps on the moon to the current Phoenix mission on Mars.
In his critique of both documentaries, Webb used clips that came before and after this section, so he had to have known that I have always specified that Tidbinbilla is NASA's facility.
Actually, Jarrah claimed quite clearly in his Australia and the Conspirators videos that NASA owned all Australian radio observatories.
Loosely, I refer to the Australian tracking stations as one, because they were all working together on the same project. There is a very good reason why the Australian radio observatories have the NASA logo posted on their sign. They are part of NASA's Deep Space Network. Whether it was just Australia, or Goldstone, Madrid and Australia tracking the signals, it's immaterial. All are NASA facilities. As I pointed out quite clearly in Exhibit D, the tracking stations in Goldstone, Australia and also Madrid are all owned by NASA, and therefore are not independent parties, as the propagandists have claimed.
Immediately after playing the excerpt from the ABC series Catalyst, Jarrah plays a pre-Apollo 11 mission newscast about Honeysuckle Creek. The second episode of my critique of Jarrah's Australia and the Conspirators explains how he started with this newscast, and after clever paraphrasing, had concluded that Parkes was the only radio telescope receiving the moonwalk videos, plural. An error that he finally had to admit to because of the overwhelming evidence against that claim. In the end, I'm amazed at the trivial arguments that Jarrah managed to come up with to defend his Exhibit D series. Whether Jarrah mentioned Tidbinbilla or Canberra, either with his own voice or through a narrator, it has little bearing on any of his 32 claims that I addressed in my critique. Instead of arguing with the facts that I presented, he would rather try to shoot the messenger, or attempt to discredit my presentation of the facts by geologically showing that I misrepresented statements that he made, without directly addressing his 32 claims. Whether Jarrah mentioned Tidbinbilla or Canberra, either with his own voice or through a narrator, it has little bearing on any of his 32 claims that I addressed in my critique.